morning. Good morning. It is good to be back. I'm very appreciative. Last week when I was not feeling well, I kind of hoped, but I didn't want to assume. But when Pam came home and said that you had prayed for me, I had felt a great sense of relief because it makes a difference when we pray for one another. And I very much appreciate and need your prayers. So thank you. Sunday school. Or the children's stories that we hear when we're younger. They present the Bible in a very kind of neat and tidy way, which is appropriate when you are growing up and you're reading. My parents bought all 10 volumes, and out of guilt, I read all 10 volumes because my dad said it was like $250 way back when. And I remember like, oh, that was a lot of money in the 70s. And I was like, oh, why? They shouldn't spend that kind of money on me. And my dad said, if you and your sister read them all, then it was worth every penny. So I read my half out of financial obligation. My sister did not. But I figured at least they got, and I still think of it every time I see this, well, at least they got half their money's worth. But the reason why I'm reading it, and actually it was interesting because of the reading that Mark had. So let me read what I read in my scripture. Again, different translation. But it was, as the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had bore to Abraham, saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had bore to Abraham, playing with her son Isaac. So she said to Abraham, cast this slave woman and her son, for the son of the slave woman shall not inherit alongside my son Isaac. Which is has a different feel to the one where you read, where it said that Ishmael was mocking Isaac. And I went back to my old, I skipped out during one of the songs because I thought we had this one, but it says here, let me go. Here. But everyone in the camp was not happy. Hagar knew now that Isaac had come. Her son Ishmael, now 14 years of age, would never stand a chance of being Abraham's heir. And in her jealousy, she poked fun at Sarah and her baby. So did Ishmael. At last, Sarah became so angry, she asked Abraham to get rid of them both. Unwilling to do anything that might seem unkind, Abraham talked to God about the trouble, and God said it would be better for him to let them go, but not to worry, that he would look after them. Now, that has a very different feel to when you read the kind of just basically Ishmael was playing and Sarah was not happy. And I get it. Like I said, and when I was young, I read it and okay, yeah, it made sense that Abraham would send off Hagar and Ishmael into the desert. But now that I'm older, I'm thinking, whoa, exile for even if he was mocking him, that seems rather harsh. If I had to exile one of my children every time they made fun of another one of my children, but we read these passages and growing up, fair enough, we want in no sense subjecting a 7 or 8 year old to the whole book of Judges where, yeah, even as an adult, you read some of those and you're like, oh. But the problem comes when, as we get older, we still hold to that more clean, simplistic view of the Bible. Because the problem is we start to look at it and we say, oh, well, that's how everything should be. That's who we are. And it's not. And it wasn't then either. We are desperate always to make everything neat and tidy, to find everything with a neat little bow. We don't like anything to be sticking out. And so to do that, we often look for like, okay, something like this happened, who was wrong? Who was the villain? And in the book there, and even in some of the translations, Hagar and Ishmael, it's kind of, they imply that they deserve what they got. But looking at it now, Sarah, if I have to find a villain when I'm reading it, my first glance is Sarah, and it says Sarah was jealous. It wasn't that she was, hurt, or the term, the word that's used is she was jealous of Hagar and of Ishmael, and she didn't want any threat to the inheritance of her son. Now again, different time, different era, and we see even with Jacob and Esau and all of the infighting. So it's a different world in many ways. But it's still hard to read and to see what Sarah did and say, oh no, that was good. Because it does not feel that way. And for Abraham, like, grab a backbone. But he was kind of like, well, okay, my wife wants to send him off, and God is kind of like, all right. And here's the interesting thing. So Abraham does not really stand up. Sarah is responding out of jealousy. What Hagar may or may not have done, and Ishmael, he's a 14-year-old boy. We're not going to even go there. But the thing is, it's not a simple situation. This story that we have that was shared, that was written down and given to us, is not one with neat, tidy boxes to make everything just fit perfectly. But what does God do? God doesn't say to Abraham, your wife is jealous, get rid of her. No. He doesn't say that Sarah is, he realizes that this is going to continue to build, and who knows where it's going to go. So God, without trying to judge either Sarah or Abraham or even Hagar or Ishmael and Isaac, the grace of God is present. In this imperfect, broken system, still the grace of God is there. The grace of God is there for Sarah in her weakness and in her jealousy. It's there in Abraham's not being able to take a stand, and it's there for Hagar who is left. And that part there where she puts her son under a bush and goes off and doesn't want to see him die, that I don't know how you do not read that and are not moved by it. And yet God is present. And God is with Hagar, is with Ishmael. Interestingly enough, I don't know if you know this or not, but for Muslims, this is a significant story in the Old Testament because they see themselves as children of Abraham as well, and Ishmael is seen as the ancestor of Muhammad. And so in this way, they too fall under the umbrella of the God of Abraham. But again, God works in the imperfect situation. And in the end, no one is made perfect by God. God doesn't say, you're perfect now. God just says, in your imperfection, I will deal with you. We want clarity. We want neat, easy to follow guidelines that we can just kind of cut along the dotted line and everything falls into place. But it's not. It's messy. And the problem is when we grow up thinking everything was so neat and tidy, that everything was perfect, that we think somehow that is a representation of who we are. But we're not neat and tidy. We're messy as well. We are filled with mistakes, with sins, with things that we've done and shouldn't have done. But like with Sarah and with Abraham and with Hagar, it does not mean that God's grace does not flow with us. It does not mean that God can't do something with the situation that we have created. We are children of grace. Grace, and I like where Paul is talking, because he says in the passage of Romans, and again, people are always arguing with Paul because Paul says, grace, 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 and they're like, oh, so nothing we do matters. And he says, no, because someone had even said to Paul, so if every time I make a mistake, there is grace, and grace is a good thing, that means I should make a lot of mistakes, because then there's lots of grace, and that's just fantastic. And Paul's like, you can see him like taking his head and beating against the wall, like, oh, you people. But he's saying grace is not an excuse to sin. Grace is a reason to try again. We aren't given grace so that nothing that we do matters. We're given grace so that our past mistakes do not stop us from trying again and again and again. In the end, our relationship with God, it's not so much as we sometimes want it to be. It's not on our ability to be perfect. It's on God's ability to love and extend us grace in our imperfection. And this might not seem significant, but it is. Because it should form and shape not only how we see ourselves, but how we see the world around us. Because often we fall into a trap of where we believe the image. We see something and we strive to create that image so that people will think that, oh yes, everything is neat and tidy. We want everything to fall into that nice, crisp, clean box, and so there's no questions. And so we present ourselves as perfectly as we can so that people look at us and they'll say, well, those are godly people. But we're godly people not because we can pretend to be perfect, but because we receive the grace of God. And it's when we fall into the trap of thinking we have to seem like we don't need the grace that we actually start to do damage to the church, to ourselves, and to the people around us. There's and I probably shouldn't, but this is about mistakes. So on TikTok, that I may or may not watch occasionally, there's this one theme of this one guy who does weights. And he comes in and he's dressed as a janitor and he's looking small, and he goes up to these people and they're big and they're huge and they're lifting stuff, and he goes, oh, can I try? And he has this funny accent. They're like, oh, you can't do that. And then boom, he starts lifting them because he's actually incredibly, and it gets viewed millions of times because we always love to see the where the image is like, oh, these are the strong guys and this isn't. Now suddenly this guy's out lifting everyone. And he puts out all of these videos and people keep watching it because every time we get sucked back into it, well, no, those are the strong. We believe our eyes, we believe what we're told, and so we fall into the trap of always just accepting even when we know better. And even though people we know are imperfect, if they present as perfect, we're inclined to say, yeah, okay, they're doing everything they're supposed to. And so we feel the pressure to always put our best foot forward. You see that even more so nowadays, where with AI. One of the people one of the assistant wardens was asking, I said, well, I'm working on an email to address this issue. And she says, well, why don't you just use Copilot? I'm like, because those aren't my words. I will present it in a way that reflects who I am. I don't want it to reflect to the way that the computer thinks I should. And she's like, oh, okay. She just got surprised by that. And just to be clear, I have never, and I never ever planned to do a sermon with AI. Like that just for me, because then in some ways I'm lying to you. Because that's, yeah. Some of you might say, Gord, maybe you really should try the AI because, and I don't blame you, but I was thinking, there was a short story about this guy who comes into a town, there's two barbers in it, and he goes into the first barber shop with his son. The barber is well groomed, the shop is neat and tidy, and then he goes across the street to the other barber and his hair is kind of all over the place and his shop is filled with hair and stuff. And then he asks his son, where should we go? And the son said, well, to the neat one. And the father says, no. Do you notice how well his hair is cut? He goes, yeah. He goes, yeah. Who's cutting his hair? And who's cutting the other guy's hair? And it's something that we should learn to do, is to see beyond what catches just the immediate attention. To learn to look at something deeper. We get so caught up in image, and I was saying this on Thursday night, in prison where they all feel like everyone looks down on themselves, yet they then form their own hierarchy to look down upon others because somehow they're upset that people look down on them, but then they want to find somebody else to look down on. And we create this, and we do it outside of prison as well. We are not perfect people. Jesus never told us we would be. In fact, the gospel passage says, I come and there will be chaos. There will be turmoil, there will be anger. We would love to be able to just come about, and everywhere we go there is peace and happiness, but that's not it. And sometimes we're supposed to create turmoil when we speak out for justice, when we speak out for what we see as wrong. And some people will say, no, it's better. The Mennonite identity, the quiet in the land, this did us no favors. Because sometimes we're like, well, it's better if we don't say anything and we just kind of fade into the woodwork. No, we need to speak. And some people will say, well, that means that we don't seem very holy. But we're not holy because of how the world looks at us. We're holy because of God's grace. And we keep trying to lean into that. This Tuesday, I was having a bad day. I got another email in my continuous joy of working with CSC. And suddenly now they were giving me a schedule, and I was supposed to be able to talk to somebody about it. But basically, they were giving me a schedule where I was supposed to work every Sunday morning, every Saturday morning, and that would mean I couldn't be here. So I was prepared to quit from the prison. And I was filled with this anger and this frustration, and I thought that my assistant warden would have my back, and she did. But at that point, I was just mad. And I opened the door at 1, but somebody, and I'm not going to name names, was knocking on the door early, as he often does. And I was like, and today I was just sitting there on Tuesday, I was just like, I'm so mad, and then did it again, and I walked out to the door, I opened it up, and I said, what? And sometimes I'll go out there and I'll go like, oh no, not you, and stuff, and I'll be kidding around, and I know that, yeah, no, I am kidding around. but I know the difference in my heart, because I know I'm coming in and I'm like, hey, blah, blah, we're joking around. I also knew that on that day I was just frustrated. And I snapped at Jason, and I snapped at even more his friend who was with him, who there's no reason. Like, you should never have to knock on the door of a chapel or a church and have someone come out and greet you with, what? That's... So I felt terrible. And it really bothered me. And I am struck again and again with how much I do not do the things that I should do in the prison, in the congregation. I was telling our children that, there came that time when I realized my dad wasn't perfect. It's Father's Day, and I said, there might come that day some point when you realize I'm not perfect. Yeah, they laughed as well. But sometimes we can get so caught up in our own mistakes. We can get so caught up that we think, oh no, I'm just screwing up, I'm screwing up. And the whole thing again, going back to Abraham and Sarah, yeah, we make mistakes, but that does not negate the power of God's grace. And it's leaning into and accepting that grace for our own mistakes and for the mistakes of others. That's what defines us as a holy people, not our ability to pretend to be perfect so the community looks and goes, oh, it's our ability to accept our fallenness, but to know that God is still with us. And ergo, the fallenness of the people around us, but to know that God is still with them. Christine moved from the country into kind of a medium-sized city. Her husband had passed away and she moved off the farm. Her 2 children had moved off to different directions, and so she didn't want to live, she wanted to do something different. So she got a house in the suburbs and was settling in and wanted to go to a church. There were 2 churches that were kind of equal distance away from her. And so she thought, well, I will try out for the first time in her life the church she'd been to before, she had grown up in, she had attended. So it was kind of exciting to be able to kind of church shop. So the one church was quite large and looked fancy. The other church looked less fancy and was smaller. But she thought, I'm going to give them both a chance. So she went to the big church first, and she thought, well, I got to make a good first impression. So she dressed up and looked nice, and she walked in, and she realized it was a good thing she did because everyone was dressed well, and it was just overwhelming how neat and tidy and how beautiful everything looked. And as soon as she came in, there was greeters at the door, and they took her and they said, "Would you like a coffee?" And she goes, and they took her to a really fancy coffee machine where she didn't really know what she was ordering. And they said, "Would you like an espresso?" And she goes, "Sure. How much?" She said, "A double." She shook for 3 days after that. But it was so overwhelming and so nice. And she sat down, and everyone was so kind to her. And the sermon was about how blessed the people of the congregation are, and how God wants the best. And she wound up feeling like, oh, I feel kind of special. This was kind of nice. The next Sunday, she went to the smaller church. And it was not as, she was one of the better dressed people there, but that was okay. And she realized it was filled more with kind of different kinds of people. There was one woman who wore purple, like purple from top to bottom, purple. Everything was purple. And but she felt very much like she belonged. They didn't go over the top like the other church, but they made her feel welcome. And the sermon was more kind of what she grew up with about, her part in the community and making a difference. And so she kept going back and forth between the two churches because she couldn't figure out which one felt right. She liked the feeling of the big church and kind of feeling like she was special, but she felt more a sense of grace at the other one. So she went, and like I said, the large church, every once in a while they would talk very much about us and them. And there was a sense of a division of, the holy people and the unholy people. And that bothered her, but that wasn't everyone. And the smaller church was good, but it was filled with the person that dressed in purple. She dressed in purple every Sunday in different. She didn't know there was that many purple clothes in the world. And there's another guy who wore cutoffs and a t-shirt and flip-flops, irregardless of the weather. It could be sleeting outside and he'd wear flip-flops. But she was trying to figure out, like, which church do I go to? And they both kind of met a different need. And their son came to visit, and he came, and he was over 2 Sundays with his wife. And so she took him to both churches, and she said to him, "So, what do you think I should do?" And her son just kind of laughed. He says, "You'll figure it out, Mom." And she found that so irritating because he said it in exactly the same way that she used to say things to him when he was trying to figure out. That same sort of like, "You'll figure it out, don't worry." She was like, "Oh, don't do that." And he goes, "No, Mom, you will figure this out. Trust me." And then he says, when's Samantha coming? And Samantha was his sister, her daughter. She goes, "Well, she's coming 2 weekends from now." I said, "Okay, you'll figure it out, Mom." And he left. And she was kind of like, I don't know what he means by that. And she was thinking about it. And then it clicked. Samantha was coming 2 weekends. Samantha and her had at times a turbulent relationship. Very much loved each other, but hadn't always agreed. And Samantha had made some interesting choices in her life. One of them being that she had a lot of tattoos, and facial neck tattoos, facial tattoos, and a lot of piercings. There were holes in her ear, in her eyebrow, in her lips, in her tongue, and it was like, but that's fine. And Christine loved Samantha and knew that Samantha was an amazing person, and vice versa. But she also realized that she would feel incredibly comfortable bringing Samantha to one church, but not to the other. And she realized right there that the church that she wanted to call home would be the church where her daughter could come and be accepted. Like churches, we ourselves do better when we lean into the grace of God. It's not that I don't want to seem good, perfect even at times, but as soon as I start thinking that it's about who I am, about how I present, and not about that incredible grace that I lean upon, that I crave, that I need, I start to wander off the path. We start with God's grace. And the thing is, it's more than enough. And it's not that gives us license to do whatever we want. It's that it encourages us even when we fail, even when we snap at someone who comes to the door, even when we mispronounce every other word, even when we do all of these weird, stupid little things about ourselves. Still, God is with us. And if we see that God is with us, how can we not but see that God is with the people around us? And I do believe it is at those times that we truly become a holy people.